when my wife, Rachel, and I first decided to leave military housing and move into a quiet suburban neighborhood. We were brimming with optimism. We had spent the past 10 years on various bases. My career as an elite military bomb disposal officer in the United States Army took us around the globe. Now that I was back stateside on a prolonged leave, we sought a calmer life for our family, especially our 6-year-old son, James. From the moment we drove through the wrought iron gates of Magnolia Heights, we felt we'd found a place that promised peace and security. Tree-lined streets curved gracefully around neatly manicured lawns, and rows of pastel-colored houses basked in the summer sun. A large sign at the entrance read, "Welcome to Magnolia Heights," proudly managed by the HOA. I'd always been wary of HOAs. My brother had once told me stories of overzealous board members who regulated everything from mailbox color to the height of hedges. But Magnolia Heights looked so idyllic that I brushed off any concerns. That was my first mistake. Shortly after we began unloading the moving truck, an older gentleman named Tom Green, who lived across the street, strolled over. With a wide grin, he offered a hand. "Welcome to Magnolia Heights, neighbor. Need help with those boxes?" I gladly accepted. While helping me haul furniture, Tom dropped a cryptic hint. "Just watch out for Belinda Arnett, better known as Karen. She's the HOA president." "Why do people call her Karen?" I asked. Tom lowered his voice. "Let's just say she's got a reputation. She likes to micromanage everything. I'm sure she has good intentions, but she can be intense." I shrugged, thinking I'd survived real battlefields. How bad could one power-hungry HOA president be? I would soon find out that even suburban spats can escalate into a war zone, especially when Karen decides to play with bombs. Early the next morning, as I carried a box of kitchenware out of the moving truck, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Good morning. You must be the new neighbor." I turned to see a woman in her mid-50s, hair done in a perfectly coiffed bob that didn't move an inch, even in the breeze. She wore a crisp blouse, neatly pressed slacks, and an expression of polite condescension. In one hand, she clutched a leather binder embossed with a gold Magnolia Heights HOA seal. "Hi," I replied. "Yes, we just moved in yesterday. I'm Andrew Phillips." Her handshake was brisk, more of a formal press than a greeting. "I'm Belinda Arnett, but everyone just calls me Karen." She gave a tight smile. "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association here. I like to welcome our new residents personally and go over the guidelines. We have quite a few rules in place to keep Magnolia Heights harmonious." I mustered a friendly grin, though her presence set me on edge. "Nice to meet you. My wife and I will be sure to follow any regulations." Karen tapped the binder with a manicured fingernail. "I've left the welcome packet on your porch. It's all in there. Trash schedules, lawn heights, which colors are allowed for fences, etc. If you have any questions, feel free to call me." I pride myself on being readily available. "Thanks," I said, biting back the urge to ask if we truly needed so many rules for a quiet neighborhood. Instead, I forced a polite nod. "We appreciate it." Karen's gaze shifted to the moving truck parked partly on the curb. She pursed her lips. "Please note that vehicles must not block sidewalks. We don't want pedestrians inconvenienced." "Right, of course," I said, feeling a flicker of annoyance. "We'll move it as soon as we can." She gave another thin smile. "Very good." Then, turning on her heel, she marched back toward her SUV, which idled in the pristine driveway across the street. I exhaled, half amused. If an HOA was going to be our biggest challenge, I felt confident I could handle it. Little did I know that Karen's brand of community regulation ran far deeper than lawn ornaments and parking violations. Within a week, Karen made her presence felt in more intrusive ways. For instance, I found a bright yellow notice taped to our front door. Notice of noncompliance. Your trash bin was placed at the curb earlier than the HOA-approved time frame. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $50. It was stamped with Karen's signature at the bottom. I frowned, checking the rulebook in the welcome packet. Sure enough, Magnolia Heights mandated that trash bins be put out no earlier than 7 p.m. the evening before collection. I'd put ours out at 6:40 p.m. The difference was laughably minor, but apparently enough for Karen to issue a violation. Rachel rolled her eyes when she saw the notice. "This is ridiculous. We're new here. Couldn't they just give a warning or a friendly reminder?" I tried to stay calm, not wanting to make waves. "I'll go to the next HOA meeting," I said. and see if we can't sort out a more neighborly approach. But part of me remembered Tom's warning. Karen was known for doubling down on rules, not relaxing them. Sure enough, as the days went by, we got more petty notices. Our grass was half an inch too tall, or the color of our mailbox was not on the pre-approved pallet. To me, these things seemed insignificant. But Karen treated every minor infraction like a personal affront. Yet something else stood out. Whenever I glimpsed Karen from my window, I sensed a restlessness. She held her phone in tense conversations, brows knitted. Sometimes, she'd glance around the street, as if ensuring no one overheard. It struck me that she might be dealing with deeper issues than just lawn care. I chalked it up to overstressed personality, but in reality, the stakes were far higher than I suspected. The monthly HOA meeting took place in a small community center near Magnolia Heights Central Park. About 30 residents attended, arranged in rows of folding chairs facing a podium. Karen stood at that podium, flanked by a few other board members with forced smiles. As soon as the meeting commenced, she launched into a list of community concerns, citing various violations: blown-off leaves, poorly placed flower pots, minor fence height discrepancies. Midway through, a neighbor named Marcia tried to raise a question about adding a new children's playground in the common area. Karen smoothly dismissed it, insisting that the budget was tight and the board had more pressing matters to address. Another neighbor, John Reynolds, complained that the HOA's rules were too restrictive. He argued for more flexibility. Karen cut him off, insisting the strict rules kept property values high. The atmosphere felt tense. People rolled their eyes or exchanged exasperated glances whenever Karen spoke. However, no one directly challenged her authority. It was as if they all believed no one could outmaneuver her. Finally, after an hour of hearing Karen lecture about compliance and fines, I raised my hand. "I'm Andrew Phillips, new to Magnolia Heights." I began, my tone polite. "The guidelines are quite detailed. Perhaps we could add a short grace period for new residents? Just so we're not hit with fines right away for small oversights, like trash bins or mailbox colors." Karen's lips tightened. "I understand your concern, Mr. Phillips, but we pride ourselves on consistency. If we allow exceptions for one household, it undermines the entire system. I'm sure you can appreciate that uniformity is key." I nodded, not wanting to pick a fight, but I sensed the frustration in the room. Karen's iron grip was stifling. Neighbors whispered that she never listened to suggestions unless they aligned with her own agenda. I left the meeting with a sense of uneasy acceptance. Karen would not budge an inch. The best I could do, for now, was keep my household compliant and stay under her radar. I had no idea how quickly that radar would expand, or how dangerously. One late afternoon, about 3 weeks after we'd moved in, I noticed Karen skulking around my next-door neighbor's driveway, peering under their SUV. Startled by her behavior, I slipped outside and pretended to trim my hedges, hoping to observe without confrontation. Karen crouched, as if examining something underneath the neighbor's vehicle. Her phone was in one hand, and she snapped a few photos. Then she stood, scanning the area before hurrying off to her own house. Curiosity gnawed at me. What was so interesting about the underside of a car? My neighbor, Doug, came home soon after. I casually mentioned Karen's odd behavior. He scowled. "She's been messing with me ever since I ran against her for the HOA presidency 2 years ago. She hates that I opposed her. I suspect she's been looking for excuses to find me. Maybe she's checking for an oil leak or something. Who knows?" I got the sense Doug believed Karen was simply petty, spying for some trivial violation. But my instincts, honed on dangerous missions overseas, sensed a bigger story. Who checks the underside of a rival's SUV with such intense scrutiny? If only I had known how close to the truth that question would bring me. A few days later, Doug's SUV vanished from his driveway. He knocked on my door, agitated, and asked if I'd seen anyone tow it away. I hadn't. Doug called the police, suspecting it had been stolen. But as the days passed, no leads emerged. Oddly, Doug mentioned that he and Karen had a heated argument the night before his SUV went missing. She'd accused him of delinquent HOA payments, which Doug vehemently denied. When I next saw Karen, she wore a satisfied smirk. She didn't openly discuss Doug's missing vehicle, focusing instead on how well the neighborhood looked these days. The dissonance set alarm bells ringing in my head. Meanwhile, Tom Green, the neighbor across the street, told me that a handful of residents had recently faced bizarre pranks, tires slashed, side mirrors smashed, or windshields egged. They all had one thing in common. They'd opposed Karen or voiced displeasure at her leadership style. None had proof linking these acts to her, and the local police had bigger concerns than petty vandalism. For me, a bigger concern was Karen's fascination with cars. First, she was seen snooping around Doug's SUV. Then Doug's SUV disappeared entirely. The significance wasn't yet clear, but the unusual circumstances led me to quietly keep an eye on Karen's movements whenever possible. I had faced cunning adversaries in war zones. Ironically, this suburban setting was starting to feel just as perilous. I had tried to keep a low profile about my professional background. After all, bomb disposal expert isn't exactly an everyday conversation topic. But one afternoon, while barbecuing in our backyard, Tom Green mentioned hearing rumors from another neighbor that I was some kind of ex-military guy. Word travels fast in a tight-knit community. People are curious about your career, Tom said, sipping a soda. Karen might be too. She tends to keep close tabs on all personal details. I grimaced. I prefer not to broadcast it. But if asked, yes, I served in the army. That's about it. Tom shrugged. No worries from me. Just know that around here, secrets don't stay hidden for long. Sure enough, the very next day, Karen confronted me while I was washing my car. She sauntered up, binder in hand, eyes glinting with curiosity. So, Andrew, she began, I've heard some interesting chatter that you were in the military. Mind telling me more? I kept my tone light. Yes, I served. 15 years. Recently came back stateside. Karen tilted her head. What did you do exactly? I hesitated. Logistics. She didn't look convinced. She forced a smile, but her eyes were calculating. Well, that's fascinating. It's always good to have disciplined individuals in Magnolia Heights. Then she abruptly changed the subject to the color of my recycling bin, which she claimed violated the HOA's guidelines. The conversation ended with her promising to send me another citation if I didn't repaint the bin in an approved neutral tone. As she walked away, I was left uneasy. Karen smelled a secret. In my experience, the more suspicious someone was, the deeper they'd dig. I only hoped she wouldn't pry into my real specialty, disarming bombs. About a month passed. The tension in Magnolia Heights lingered. Rumors swirled that Karen wanted to unseat certain long-standing HOA board members, presumably to consolidate her power. Meanwhile, Doug, whose SUV remained missing, was publicly accusing her of orchestrating the theft out of spite. Karen responded with stony silence. One evening, I spotted Karen in her driveway, wearing gloves and carefully loading something into the trunk of her sedan. Curiosity got the better of me, so I crept closer, keeping in the shadows of the hedges. Under the dim glow of a street lamp, I glimpsed two metal canisters, each about a foot long. She nestled them gently among what looked like wires and a small metal box. My training kicked in. That setup resembled components used for explosive devices, timers, wiring harnesses, possibly improvised containers. My pulse quickened. Why would an HOA president have these items? Later that night, I confided in Rachel. I can't be sure, but I think Karen might have explosives. Or at least the makings of something. It doesn't make sense, but... Rachel's face paled. Andrew, what do we do? Call the police. I rubbed my brow, torn. With no solid proof or direct threat, the police might dismiss it as speculation. Give me a day or two, I said. I'll watch carefully. If I see anything undeniably criminal, I'll make the call. In my heart, I already suspected we were past mere paranoia. Karen was planning something big, and it likely involved those who opposed her power within the HOA. But the scale of her intentions was about to rock this quiet neighborhood more than I imagined. That weekend, the tension boiled over. Another HOA meeting took place, short, chaotic, and cut off abruptly when Karen stormed out halfway. The reason? Howard Park, one of the few board members who dared to challenge her, had announced plans to run against Karen in the upcoming election. He openly criticized her for unfair fines, ignoring community input, and possible misuse of HOA funds. Karen's expression darkened. Her lips curled into a snarl as she hissed at Howard. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. You'd be wise to withdraw. Howard refused. The neighbors deserve better, Karen. We're done being bullied. A hush fell across the room. Even from the back row, I saw Karen's eyes flick with unbridled fury. She gathered her papers and stalked out, slamming the door behind her. The other board members looked uneasy. They scheduled an emergency session later that week to discuss the hotly contested election. Doug, Tom Green, and others whispered in the hall. Some speculated that Karen would try to sabotage Howard's campaign. Others joked that she might flatten his tires. I, however, remembered the suspicious items she'd stashed in her trunk. Something told me she was beyond petty vandalism. After the meeting, I hurried to catch up with Howard in the parking lot. "Be careful," I warned him softly. "Karen's not someone to push lightly. She might be more extreme than you realize." He laughed it off. "Don't worry, Andrew. I've handled plenty of tough people in my time. I won't let her intimidate me." I forced a smile, uneasy. If only he knew the dangers I suspected were lurking behind her polite facade. That very night, as I lay in bed, I heard the faint beep of a car alarm from the street. My instincts buzzed. Nudging Rachel awake, I slipped out of bed and peeked through the window. A dark figure crouched near Howard's car, parked just 2 houses away. Even in the gloom, I recognized Karen's silhouette. She wore a beanie cap and black jacket, her face partially obscured. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone and crept outside, hugging the shadows. Karen moved with practiced stealth, fiddling with something near the rear wheel well. She pressed a button on a small device, then stood. As the streetlight caught her face, I saw her lips twist in a grim smile. She carefully slid something under the vehicle's frame. Then she walked briskly back toward her own property, glancing left and right. I waited until she disappeared. Then, mustering my courage, I inched closer to Howard's car. My phone flashlight revealed a small, improvised contraption attached to the undercarriage. Wires protruded from what looked like a rectangular metal container. My blood froze. It was an explosive device, possibly remote-activated or timed. I couldn't be sure without closer inspection. Every fiber of my bomb disposal training kicked into gear. Step 1. Confirm the presence of an IED. Step 2. Evacuate civilians. Step 3. Safely disarm or call in specialized support. I carefully examined the device from a safe angle. If it was booby-trapped with an anti-handling mechanism, a single wrong move might trigger it. Without hesitation, I dialed 911, explaining the situation and my background. The dispatcher's voice wavered with alarm when I mentioned a potential car bomb. They promised to send local police and the bomb squad. But time might be critical. If it was set on a timer, we couldn't wait. I had to make a split-second decision, rely on my training or wait for reinforcements. Given the proximity of other houses and the fact that my own family was just down the street, I decided to act. I retreated to my garage and retrieved my personal bomb disposal kit, tools I kept out of an abundance of caution, the same tools that had saved my life overseas. This was no war zone, but the threat was just as real. Working quickly yet methodically, I approached Howard's car once more. The local police cruiser had just arrived at the neighborhood gate, but I knew the official bomb squad might take longer. In my earpiece, the 911 dispatcher asked, "Are you sure you want to attempt this?" I took a deep breath. I have specialized training. I can handle it. Using a small mirror attached to a flexible rod, I peered under the car. The device had a digital display that counted down from 12 minutes. I inhaled sharply. Karen had set a timer. She intended this to explode within minutes, presumably injuring or killing Howard and anyone nearby. Carefully, I clamped the device with a specialized bracket, ensuring minimal movement. My gloved fingers traced the primary wire leading to the power source. One red, one blue, one green. Typical improvised color coding, but I recognized the style from my training. The next step, determine the circuit sequence. Sometimes, the real threat is a hidden secondary trigger. Time ticked by. I methodically used a small fiber optic camera to inspect the interior. It looked like standard explosive compounds inside a sturdy steel container, possibly strong enough to shred the entire vehicle and harm bystanders. Sweat trickled down my brow as I snipped the red wire first. The display flickered. Next, I found the bridging circuit that fed the ignition coil. I cut that. The timer froze at 8 minutes, 21 seconds. My chest loosened in relief. The device powered down. Police officers and a couple of neighbors who'd gathered at a distance watched with wide eyes as I slowly eased the device away from the car. I placed it in a blast-resistant container. Moments later, the official bomb squad arrived, verifying that the device was indeed live and deadly. They stared at me in amazement as I explained my Army background. The lead technician shook my hand, calling it a textbook defusal. But I took no pride in the moment. My heart thundered with another realization. Karen had built a bomb, or at least arranged for it to be built, then planted it under Howard's car. The question burned. Why? After the defusal, police cordoned off the street, questioning neighbors. Howard was beside himself, trembling with shock. Why would someone try to blow up my car? He muttered repeatedly. Many of us knew the answer all too well. I gave a statement to the lead investigator, Detective Powell, detailing everything I'd seen. Karen crouched by Howard's car, placing something suspicious. I also revealed how I'd glimpsed suspicious canisters in Karen's trunk days before. Powell's eyes darkened. If this is true, she's committed attempted murder. We'll need solid evidence to arrest her. His team marched to Karen's house. Unsurprisingly, she refused to open the door, claiming she had nothing to do with the bomb. From inside, she shouted that the allegations were ludicrous, labeling me a liar. The detective didn't have a warrant yet, so he couldn't forcibly enter. He left an officer outside, waiting for further instructions and an emergency warrant request. Meanwhile, news spread like wildfire around Magnolia Heights. Residents huddled in driveways, whispering in disbelief. The HOA president had turned violent? Even Doug, whose missing SUV had never been found, seemed rattled, wondering if Karen had done something far worse with his vehicle. Yet Karen remained defiant, sending out an HOA-wide email the next morning that read, "These false allegations against me are a malicious attempt to tarnish my reputation. I assure you, I have always worked to protect our community. The real culprit is among us, someone who wants to spread fear." Many neighbors were unconvinced, but a handful still believed her, or at least wanted proof. I had no illusions. The situation would escalate until the police got their warrant, or until Karen made her next move. While the police navigated legal paperwork, I realized I might need more concrete evidence. One day, Tom Green quietly pulled me aside, saying, "I noticed Karen going in and out of an old storage shed near the community tennis courts. Hardly anyone uses that place anymore. Might be where she's stashing suspicious stuff." My gut told me that was worth checking. Late that night, I snuck over to the tennis courts, slipping through a gap in the fence. The storage shed stood in shadows, a padlock on the door. With the stealth I'd honed in the military, I managed to pick the lock carefully. My heart pounded. I was straddling a fine line between civic duty and possible trespass. But saving lives sometimes required bold steps. Inside the shed, the smell of chemicals assaulted my nose. A single bulb overhead revealed a makeshift workspace, jars of metal fragments, a half-empty bag of fertilizer, common in homemade explosives, wires, circuit boards, and scattered notes in Karen's spidery handwriting. I recognized phrases like timing fuse, igniter test, and car ignition rig. This was a bomb-making station. I snapped photos on my phone, documenting everything. This was beyond circumstantial evidence. The half-assembled device on the work table looked similar to the one I'd defused under Howard's car. My stomach turned. Karen wasn't just petty. She was a full-blown domestic terrorist in the making. As I quietly backed out of the shed, I nearly collided with a figure who stepped from the darkness. My adrenaline spiked. But it was Tom Green, whispering, "Found anything?" I nodded grimly. Enough to put her away for years. Tom's expression was a mixture of relief and horror. "We have to show the police." We parted ways, determined to deliver these photos and share our findings with Detective Powell first thing in the morning. But Karen was always a step ahead. At dawn, I marched into the police station with Tom, phone in hand, and demanded to see Detective Powell. He and the bomb squad lead studied the photos, eyes widening as they recognized a veritable bomb factory. This was the solid proof needed for an arrest warrant. Powell wasted no time. "We'll mobilize a SWAT team to take her in safely." This ends today. We returned to Magnolia Heights, flanked by unmarked police cars and a SWAT van. But Karen was gone. Her sedan was missing from the driveway. According to a neighbor, she'd peeled out minutes earlier, trunk loaded with suitcases. Police scoured her house, finding the place in a rush of disarray. Drawers yanked open, closets emptied. No sign of the metal canisters or the bombs. It seemed Karen had fled. For the next 48 hours, an APB, all points bulletin, was put out, and local highways were monitored for her vehicle. The tension was suffocating. Could she be planning another strike? Or simply running from the law? Finally, a trooper near the state border spotted Karen's sedan at a gas station. He called for backup. The moment police moved in, Karen tried to drive off, but her vehicle was blocked. She was arrested at gunpoint, shrieking about a conspiracy against her. The trooper recovered a loaded handgun from her glove box, along with a partly assembled explosive device stuffed in a duffel bag. She'd been ready to deploy it if cornered. Thus ended her short-lived attempt to escape accountability, or so we thought. But the real drama was yet to unfold. Karen was brought back in handcuffs, under heavy guard, and placed into interrogation at the local precinct. She refused to speak except to proclaim her innocence and rail about persecution by troublemakers. Meanwhile, the SWAT team, armed with the new evidence from the shed, secured a search warrant for the entire Magnolia Heights HOA office. That's where they discovered ledgers showing how Karen had used HOA funds to purchase bomb-making materials under the guise of maintenance supplies. The media seized on the story. News vans lined the gates of Magnolia Heights, broadcasting live updates. HOA President arrested after car bomb found. Suburban terror plot foiled by ex-military bomb tech. Reporters clamored for interviews. Helicopter cameras hovered overhead as the SWAT team hauled out boxes of incriminating materials from the HOA building, further humiliating Karen in front of the entire nation. Under mounting pressure, the district attorney's office announced charges against Karen, including attempted first-degree murder, possession of explosive devices, terroristic threats, and embezzlement of HOA funds. The evidence was overwhelming. The workshop, the defused bomb, witness statements, and financial records. Additional charges surfaced when Doug's missing SUV was found in a junkyard, partially dismantled. Police believed she'd stolen it to practice bomb placements without arousing suspicion at home. Karen's face was plastered across national news, her mugshot capturing the wild-eyed meltdown of a woman who had once ruled her suburban fiefdom with an iron fist. The day Karen stood trial, the courthouse was packed. Neighbors from Magnolia Heights filled the gallery, eyes fixed on the woman who once handed out petty citations for mailbox colors and grass lengths. Now she faced the possibility of life in prison. In the front row, Howard, Doug, Tom, and I sat side by side, a united front of those she had targeted or threatened. The prosecution laid out a damning case, presenting the half-constructed bombs from the shed, the photographic evidence of her planting the device under Howard's car, and my own expert testimony on defusing the IED. Doug testified about the suspicious disappearance of his SUV. A financial analyst explained how thousands of HOA dollars were siphoned off to buy bomb components. Karen's defense tried to paint her as mentally unstable, manipulated by external influences, or driven by fear. But it didn't hold up well against the cold, hard facts. Midway through the trial, Karen abruptly rose, shouting about neighborhood traitors and how they forced my hand. That outburst sealed her fate. The jury saw her unhinged malice on full display. After a short deliberation, the verdict came back, guilty on multiple counts. In a final hearing, the judge lambasted Karen for endangering innocent lives, misusing her authority, and betraying the trust of her community. He sentenced her to 40 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 25. Additionally, her property would be forfeited to help repay misused HOA funds and cover restitution to the victims, particularly to Howard, whose life she so carelessly endangered. Karen shrieked as deputies led her away in shackles, tears streaming down her once arrogant face. The cameras captured every moment, broadcasting her humiliating downfall to millions across the country. Following Karen's dramatic exit, Magnolia Heights breathed a collective sigh of relief. The neighbors, once cowering under her petty fines, banded together to restore harmony. The HOA was restructured from the ground up, with Howard elected as the new president, supported by level-headed board members who valued dialogue over dictatorship. Among the first changes, all the draconian rules were revised or scrapped entirely. Residents could finally choose mailbox colors without fear of retribution. The atmosphere lightened almost overnight. No more covert citations, No more tense stares from an all-powerful president. People walked their dogs with ease, kids played on lawns without worrying about violations, and block parties became frequent as everyone celebrated the downfall of tyranny. I, for one, resumed a more normal life. My training in bomb disposal was recognized by the local authorities, and they occasionally consulted me for safety checks or emergency planning. But for the most part, I was happy to settle into fatherhood and suburban routines. Rachel was relieved that we could finally enjoy a community that no longer felt like a war zone. James, our son, made new friends on the street, riding his bike with other kids in a neighborhood free of stifling oversight. The ghost of Karen lingered only in stories neighbors told, half in horror, half in relief. She remained behind bars, her grand suburban empire reduced to a few drab cells and daily roll calls. Even her house was auctioned off, the proceeds used to cover legal and restitution costs. A new family moved in, painting the shutters a bright teal, something Karen would have hated. Every now and then, I'd catch a snippet on the news about the case's final appeals. But her conviction held strong. The final glimpse I saw was a short footage of Karen being transferred to a higher security prison facility, her face grim and sullen. In the end, she became a cautionary tale about how unchecked power and fanaticism could mutate into outright criminality, even in the quiet suburbs. Months turned into a year, and Magnolia Heights continued to thrive. Without the stifling grip of its former president, the neighborhood found a sense of community spirit that had been missing for so long. Backyard barbecues, holiday decorations, and laughter replaced the menacing hush that once prevailed whenever Karen patrolled the streets, binder in hand. The new HOA leadership launched real initiatives, beautifying the park, organizing charity drives, even adding the playground that Marcia had once proposed. There was a newfound pride in the neighborhood, a collective vow never to let fear or authoritarianism take root again. Occasionally, a reporter might knock on my door, asking for an interview about the HOA bomb scare. Intrigued by the notion of an ex-military bomb disposal officer going head-to-head with a suburban extremist, I politely declined, preferring to let the story rest. What mattered most was that no one had been harmed, and the threat was neutralized before tragedy struck. Standing on my porch one evening, I watched James play catch with Rachel under the glow of the streetlight. The memory of defusing that deadly device still haunted me sometimes, but it also reminded me of the good that came from staying vigilant. You don't need a war zone for bombs to threaten lives. Sometimes, the greatest dangers hide behind manicured lawns and picket fences. But as the warm suburban nights settled around me, I couldn't help but feel gratitude. We had turned a place that could have been forever scarred by violence into a genuine home. And the woman who once tried to bomb her neighbors into submission now lived behind steel bars, stripped of the power she once wielded. This was the new Magnolia Heights, where fear had given way to hope, where the Karen who tried to rule with terror became a cautionary footnote in local history. And for me, an elite bomb disposal officer turned suburban dad, life had never felt so peaceful or so well-earned.